Hello everyone, and welcome to Hopeful Moments 1. Today, we're going to share a story about the pain of being abandoned by one's parents, the growth that comes from suffering, and the value of asserting one's own identity. Today's story will take you through a series of shocking revelations. Shocking in the sense that the parents didn't even realize that they had, in fact, missed their daughter's wedding. My father, who has always been weak, finally stood up against my mother. And my mother, after being furious, ended up pleading for forgiveness when her reputation was tarnished. Now, I have the right to decide whether or not to forgive, instead of desperately clinging to my parents' affection like before. If you find this story interesting and filled with meaningful lessons, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more valuable insights. I, 27F, have a younger brother named Mike, 21M. If I had to describe him in one word, it would be childish. Mike has never truly matured, even though he's already 21. He is the kind of person who demands absolute obedience from others, always insisting that everything go exactly his way, and constantly seeking attention. Not only does he exhibit childish behavior, but he is also the epitome of a spoiled mama's boy, quite literally a mother's favorite son. From a very young age, he became accustomed to being indulged by our parents to the extreme. He was enveloped in an environment where every need, desire, and even his fleeting whims were immediately met. If not, he would whine, pout, or even throw a tantrum, and of course, our parents would rush to soothe him, as if the whole world would collapse if he wasn't happy. This went on for years, to the point that Mike never learned how to be independent or even care about the feelings of others. Even so, Mike has never had any special needs, never experienced any health issues at birth, never suffered any serious injuries, nor was there any specific reason that he needed special care more than I did. He was simply born. And just because of that, our parents devoted all of their attention to him, completely neglecting me, as if I were merely a secondary member of the family. This blatant favoritism was especially clear on my mother's side, 50F. Before Mike was born, she was an amazing mother, loving me, caring for me just like any other devoted parent. But everything changed once Mike arrived. Gradually, she transformed into one of those mama's boys fanatics that people often ridicule online, a person who believes her son is the center of the universe, that no one could ever be as wonderful or important as he is. All of her attention, affection, and even sacrifices were reserved for Mike, while I was slowly pushed to the sidelines. From trivial matters like meals and clothing to significant issues such as education and the future, everything revolved around Mike. When I was little, I tried every possible way to catch my mother's attention, achieving high marks, helping out around the house, doing things to make her happy, but all my efforts were completely ignored. Over time, I came to realize that no matter what I did, I could never compete with Mike in my mother's eyes. And what about my father, 50M? He still loved me in his own way. He wasn't exactly a terrible father, he never treated me badly or completely abandoned me like my mother did. Sometimes, he even showed support, understanding, and had moments that made me feel that I still had a place in this family. But there was one major problem: he was too cowardly. For years, even though he was well aware of the injustice in my mother's treatment, my father never had the courage to stand up for me, to say, "You matter too," or to help me score even a small victory against my mother's favoritism. Whenever a conflict arose, he always chose to avoid it, to yield, or to placate without ever really addressing the problem. I had hoped that at least once, he would speak up for me. But that never happened. Instead of fighting for fairness, my father always remained silent, accepting everything as it was, thus allowing my mother to continue indulging Mike and pushing me further aside in the family portrait. Gradually, I realized that in my parents' eyes, I was never a priority. I wasn't the most important person in the house, that spot had long been taken by Mike. I wasn't the one who needed love and protection, because all of that affection was entirely reserved for Mike. And perhaps, I never truly had a family in the proper sense. The only person in the family who truly stood by me, defended me, and understood all that I had endured was my grandfather, 76M. In a family where everyone else poured their attention and priority into my younger brother, he was the only one brave enough to speak out against the injustice of our parents. He never hesitated to express his disappointment and discontent with how they favored Mike and neglected me, even if that didn't make him popular with his own son and daughter-in-law. My grandfather has never liked my younger brother. Not because he was harsh or held some unfounded prejudice against his grandson, but because he saw clearly Mike's rotten, selfish, and irresponsible nature. While everyone in our family lavished praise and indulgence on Mike, my grandfather was the only one who recognized the flaws in our parents' way of raising him. He disagreed with them giving all their preferential treatment to Mike, which had turned him into an unaccountable and unsympathetic person. He repeatedly warned that spoiling a child to such an extent would result in them growing up without knowing how to be independent or how to treat others properly. However, none of my grandfather's advice or criticisms were ever heeded by our parents. They brushed off his words as nothing more than the grumblings of a stubborn old man, insisting that he didn't understand the feelings between a parent and a child. But in reality, he knew better than anyone how a child should be loved and nurtured. My grandfather once said that I reminded him of his late wife, my grandmother. According to him, my grandmother was a strong, independent, and resilient woman who was always ready to fight for what was right and never allowed anyone to look down on her. He saw in me similar qualities, a decisiveness and inner strength that no one else in our family possessed. That, in turn, forged a special bond between us. I wasn't just his granddaughter, I was the only one in the family with whom he truly felt a deep connection. However, despite the closeness between us, a sad reality remains: the geographical distance prevents us from seeing each other frequently. He lives in another state, far away from me, and meeting him isn't something I can easily do. Every time I want to visit him, I have to rearrange my schedule, work, and even finances to make a long trip. Even though we can't meet in person as often as we'd like, my grandfather and I still keep in touch regularly via phone calls and letters. His calls have always been a tremendous source of comfort for me, helping me feel less alone in a family that has turned its back on me. He constantly reminds me that I deserve to be loved and cherished, and that I should never let my parents' injustice make me lose sight of my own self-worth. I have always wished that my grandfather lived closer, that I could visit him whenever I needed a shoulder to lean on, someone who would truly stand by my side. Yet I understand that no matter how far apart we may be, the love he has for me is always genuine. Just knowing that, no matter what happens, I have that one person in my family who truly cares for me has been an immense comfort. Mike is well aware that our mother excessively favors him, but instead of feeling guilty or embarrassed about it, he treats it as completely natural, even taking pleasure in it. Not only does he enjoy the privileges our mother bestows on him, but he also deliberately uses that favoritism to mock and trample on me whenever he gets the chance. Every time our mother shows favoritism, every time I'm treated unfairly, he appears delighted, not because he actually needs that special treatment, but simply because he enjoys seeing me hurt. This makes me feel not only abandoned by my parents but also as if I'm being ridiculed right in my own home. Because of this favoritism, coupled with Mike's arrogant and selfish nature, our relationship has never been good. Ever since we were little, we have always been at odds. I can't even count the number of times I was punished simply for doing better than him in some area or because of his false accusations. If I outperformed Mike in anything, whether it was getting higher grades, drawing better, or simply receiving praise, rather than being encouraged, I was scolded for making my little brother feel bad. My mother always found a way to protect Mike's fragile self-esteem by trampling on me, making me feel guilty just because I was capable. There were even times when I did nothing wrong yet still had to be punished because Mike concocted a story. He knew full well that our parents trusted him implicitly, and he didn't hesitate to exploit that trust to shift the blame onto me. In those instances, I had no way to defend myself, because in our parents' eyes, Mike was always the perfect child while I was merely the troublemaker. Gradually, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I could never achieve fairness in this household. Ironically, the only talent Mike truly possesses, indeed, the only thing he's really good at, is playing football. While I struggled immensely to excel academically and secure my own future, our parents treated Mike as their pride and joy simply because he could play a sport. He didn't even have to try too hard, since our parents were always there to support him unconditionally. Thanks to football, he earned a scholarship to a prestigious university out of state, further cementing our parents' favoritism towards him. However, what hurts and infuriates me the most is the way our parents treated me regarding my education and future. When I inquired about my college fund, they said that the money allocated for me had been used to cover expenses after a fire. I believed that for many years, thinking perhaps our family was genuinely facing hardships and that I had to fend for myself. But eventually, the truth emerged: the money that rightfully belonged to me had actually been given entirely to Mike. They used it to buy him a car and a house near his university, a privilege I had never even dreamed of. This revelation made me feel as if my entire life had been nothing but a lie. Not only was I abandoned, but I was also stripped of the opportunities one deserved. It's no wonder that Mike grew up to be a spoiled and selfish person. He never had to fight for anything or work for any achievement because everything was already handed to him, using what should have been mine. It was at the public university, where I pursued my studies through my own hard work, that I met Lucas. In an entirely new environment, one where I was no longer confined by the favoritism and injustice of my family, Lucas was the first person who truly captivated me. He not only possesses an attractive appearance but also has a warm, sincere, and deeply understanding personality. Throughout the lonely and isolated years of my youth within my own family, Lucas was the first person who made me realize that there are people who genuinely care about me without any ulterior motives. Of course, university not only brought Lucas into my life but also helped me meet many other wonderful people who later became my dearest friends. For the first time in my life, I had a healthy social circle where I could be myself without trying to please anyone. I was no longer judged by unfair standards or compared to my younger brother. With these friends, I was treated fairly, listened to, and truly valued. Lucas and I began as close friends for many years before we eventually became a couple. Our friendship was not merely based on fleeting attraction but was built on a foundation of trust, understanding, and deep empathy. He witnessed the pain I endured, listened when I needed a shoulder to lean on, and most importantly, he always respected me, something I rarely received from anyone in my family. It is thanks to Lucas and my close friends that I found the courage to step out of the oppressive and unjust home of my parents. Without them, I might have remained trapped in an endless cycle of despair, hurt, and helplessness. But because of them, I was able to move out, start an independent life, and truly build a future for myself without having to depend on those who never truly regarded me as a priority. Now, after many years of relentless effort, both Lucas and I have achieved remarkable success in our respective fields. We have not only earned professional recognition but also enjoy very good incomes, ensuring a stable and comfortable life. This further reinforces my belief that I can create my own success entirely on my own, without needing support or favoritism from my family. I have proven that I am not inferior to anyone, and I am no longer that little girl belittled by my family. More importantly, I have found a true life partner, someone who not only loves me but also walks with me on my journey to seek happiness and fairness for myself. With Lucas by my side, I no longer feel afraid or lost. I no longer need validation from those who abandoned me long ago. I have a real family, the one I created for myself, not the one I was forced to accept. After many years together, Lucas proposed to me a year ago. That moment was truly meaningful to me, not just because I love him, but because it marked a pivotal turning point in my life, the first time I felt like I was building a life on my own terms, free from the burdens of my past wounds. Lucas and I are both private people who don't like flaunting our personal lives on social media. For us, happiness doesn't need to be proven through glamorous photos or flashy posts. As long as we understand each other and build our future together, that is enough. That's why we didn't make a grand announcement but only shared the news with those who truly matter to us. However, a part of me still hoped that, just this once, my parents would care about me, that they would sincerely congratulate me, the way I had always longed for. I told them about the wedding, hoping for even a little joy or encouragement from them. But their reaction was nothing more than a detached, indifferent, "Oh, really?" Short, cold, emotionless, as if I had just announced something completely insignificant. At that moment, I realized a bitter truth: they had never truly listened to me. I started to think that, in their eyes, I was nothing more than a shadow, existing but never worthy of attention. Perhaps even if I told them about the most important event of my life, they wouldn't bother to care. But this time, I decided not to let them hurt me anymore. I was no longer the child who endlessly sought my parents' approval. I didn't need their blessing to be happy. Lucas and I decided to have a simple yet warm wedding, where we could celebrate with those who genuinely cared about us. Close friends, the ones who had stood by me through all of life's ups and downs, would surely be there. My real family, the people who truly love me, would be there too, even if my parents were not part of that group. In the end, this isn't just a wedding. It's a milestone, marking the moment I finally stepped out of my family's shadow and began a new chapter of my life, a chapter where I am the main character, not just a supporting role in someone else's story. Lucas, with his compassionate nature and desire for harmony, convinced me to send an invitation to my parents and brother. He believed that, no matter what had happened in the past, this was still a significant occasion, an opportunity for my family to reconnect. Even though I didn't truly believe my parents would attend or even care about my wedding, I followed his advice. A small part of me still held on to hope that, despite everything, I was still their daughter and that maybe, when they received an official invitation, they would feel something. I carefully prepared the invitations, choosing the finest paper, writing heartfelt and respectful words, and then sent them to my parents' house. But as days passed, I received no response. No message, no phone call, no words of congratulations, no questions about my plans. That was when I realized, they didn't just not care, they were deliberately ignoring me. Each time I visited home, I tried to bring up the topic of the wedding. But as soon as I started speaking, my mother would immediately cut me off and steer the conversation back to Mike and his latest accomplishments. It was always about Mike. Mike was just chosen as team captain. Mike has a chance to receive a full athletic scholarship. Mike has an important game coming up, and the whole family is so excited. It seemed like, to my mother, nothing in the world was worth discussing except for my brother's successes. At first, I endured it. I didn't want to start an argument or make the already fractured relationship between me and my mother even more strained. But one day, I realized that if I didn't fight for my voice to be heard, I would always be pushed to the sidelines. So I decided to change my approach. That day, when my mother once again started enthusiastically talking about Mike, I cut her off. I was no longer passive. "Mom, I'm planning a very important event. This is a date that cannot be changed." I intentionally didn't mention outright that it was my wedding. Partly because I wanted to see if she would care enough to ask, and partly because I was exhausted from being ignored every time I talked about myself. But my mother's response felt like a bucket of cold water poured over me. "Oh, really? Well, that's too bad. The whole family has to go support Mike that day. It's the last game of the season, and we can't miss it." At that moment, I was almost numb. A part of me had expected this reaction, but hearing it directly from my mother still hurt more than I could put into words. I had just informed her of one of the most significant days of my life, and her first thought was still about Mike. Once again, I was pushed aside, as if my existence was nothing more than an afterthought in this family. I didn't argue, beg, or try to convince my mother. If they wanted to cheer for Mike instead of witnessing their daughter's wedding, that was their choice. But this time, I wouldn't beg for their love anymore. I was exhausted from fighting to be acknowledged, and I deserved to have a family, a real family, even if not by blood, who truly loved me. My parents were too used to putting Mike first, and I was too used to being pushed aside. Over the years, I had seen them choose my younger brother over me time and time again. They had missed my ballet performances when I was little, performances I had worked tirelessly on for months, hoping to see them in the audience. But at the last minute, they always had an excuse: "Mike is sick, Mike has an important practice, Mike needs our help with his homework." As I grew older, nothing changed. My high school graduation. They didn't attend because Mike had a friendly match. My college graduation, a milestone I had worked so hard for. They didn't show up because Mike had a sports event to attend. They never apologized, never seemed to feel guilty. In their eyes, it was as if every achievement, every memorable moment in my life could be set aside if it clashed with Mike's schedule. So when they casually said they couldn't attend my most important event because Mike had his final game of the season, I wasn't even shocked or heartbroken anymore. Instead, I decided I wouldn't waste my energy trying to persuade them. I changed my approach. I knew that if I tried to argue or showed disappointment, they would just belittle my feelings. They might even accuse me of being selfish, of overreacting, of not caring about my family. So this time, I wouldn't give them the chance to hurt me again. I kept a calm expression and replied lightly, "Oh, that's okay. You should do what you feel is most important." I deliberately didn't mention that it was my wedding day. I didn't plead with them or explain further. I simply left that sentence there and ended the conversation. For the first time in my life, I no longer expected anything from them. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need them to change their minds. I simply accepted that they weren't the people I could count on for the most important day of my life. My wedding day, a perfect day without my parents. A few weeks ago, I officially became Lucas's wife. The ceremony went even better than I had dreamed. Everything was perfect, the weather, the venue, and most importantly, the people who were there. I was surrounded by those who truly loved and cherished me, Lucas's family, my closest friends, and the few relatives who had always supported me. The most beautiful moment of that day was when my grandfather took my hand and walked me down the aisle. At that moment, I no longer felt my parents' absence as a loss. On the contrary, I felt more complete than ever. My grandfather, the only one in my family who had ever stood up for me, was there to take the place my father should have filled. I knew he was proud of me, and that alone was enough to make me feel truly loved. Throughout the reception, several relatives from my side of the family approached me, asking why my parents weren't there. Some asked with skepticism, some with genuine concern. I had no intention of making excuses for them, so I answered honestly and simply. My parents were busy attending Mike's football game. The moment I said it, I saw shock flash across their faces. Some fell silent, some looked uncomfortable, and others shook their heads in disbelief. They couldn't fathom how a mother and father could miss their daughter's most important day just to watch a football match. The angriest person was my grandfather. He was speechless at first, then his expression quickly darkened with rage. I watched as his hands clenched tightly, his brows furrowed as if he was struggling to contain his emotions. Perhaps he was thinking about all the years I had endured this injustice, or maybe he was blaming himself for not being able to protect me more. But what mattered most was, there was no dramatic breakdown. I didn't break down in despair, there were no heated arguments or accusatory phone calls from my parents. Nothing extraordinary happened. Because, in the end, they no longer mattered to me. The storm that followed. After the wedding, Lucas and I put everything on hold to enjoy a blissful honeymoon. We decided to completely disconnect from the outside world, no phones, no social media, no messages or emails. Just the two of us, cherishing the most unforgettable moments of our lives. But when we returned home, we quickly realized that a storm had erupted in our absence. The moment I turned on my phone, a flood of notifications came crashing in. Messages, missed calls, social media alerts, it was overwhelming. The most notable were the countless texts from my mother and Mike. Even without reading them in detail, I had a bad feeling. Mike, as expected, immediately revealed his true nature. He called me every insult imaginable, his words dripping with anger and resentment. Through his furious messages, I could sense his frustration, his bitterness, but also the underlying pain he refused to acknowledge. It turned out that the root of his outrage came from a Facebook post. An aunt from my father's side, who had always supported me, had posted a wedding photo of me, along with a caption filled with cutting sarcasm. A beautiful day, a stunning bride, a sacred moment, what a shame her parents were too busy watching a football game. The post quickly went viral within their community. People who had once known my parents, old friends, neighbors, colleagues, And even those who had admired them were now speaking out in criticism. They couldn't believe that parents would miss their daughter's wedding just for a sports game. I could picture my parents, especially my mother, having to face judgmental stares and whispers behind their backs. The people who once saw them as the perfect family might now be looking at them differently. They were so used to treating me as secondary, so used to favoring Mike, but perhaps they had never considered the consequences of this truth being exposed. And that was what angered them the most. Not because they regretted their actions, not because they realized they were wrong, but because they were embarrassed. The backlash didn't stop at social media criticism, it spread throughout the family as well. And leading the charge was my grandfather. He had never hesitated to call out my parents' blatant favoritism toward Mike. But this time, he didn't just express disappointment, he took action. As soon as he learned the full story, he went straight to my parents' house without warning. I wasn't there to witness it, but from what relatives told me and from a few messages my grandfather later sent, the confrontation was intense. He no longer maintained his usual calm demeanor. He yelled directly at my father, his own son, without holding back. His words cut deep into my father's pride like a knife. Do you realize how much you've disappointed me? Do you understand how horribly you've treated your daughter? A father like you abandoned his own daughter on the most important day of her life? Just to watch a football game? Your mother is gone, and she is the closest thing we have left of her. And yet, you've treated her like trash all these years? My grandfather's words weren't just scoldings, they were the profound disappointment of a father toward his own son. But the most shocking thing was that my father, the man who had always remained silent under my mother's dominance, broke down in tears. And not out of anger or defiance, but in genuine pain and regret. Perhaps, for the first time in his life, he truly faced the consequences of his cowardice. He had not only abandoned me, but he had also made his own father, the man he had always looked up to, feel ashamed of him. But the biggest surprise of all was the change in my father afterward. It was as if this was the final straw that woke him up. He finally found the courage to stand up to my mother, the woman he had silently enabled for so many years, despite her favoritism and selfishness. For the first time in his life, he fought back. He declared that if my mother didn't make amends, if she refused to admit her mistakes and find a way to make things right with me, he would file for divorce. I don't know how my mother felt when she heard that. Maybe she was shocked, maybe she was furious, or maybe she never imagined my father would dare to defy her. But one thing I knew for sure, she was afraid. My mother had always been in control, always used to my father obeying her, always used to everyone around her bending to her will. But now, the man she had belittled for his weakness was standing against her, and even threatening to leave her. That's when she started messaging me. At first, her messages were filled with anger and threats. You ungrateful child. How dare you humiliate me in front of everyone? Do you even know what you've done? You are my daughter. You have to listen to me. But when I didn't respond, her tone began to change. Sweetheart, I only did this for the good of the family. I know I may have favored Mike a little, but you're still my daughter. You can't just turn your back on me. You'll break my heart. My mother, once the controlling figure, had now transformed into the perfect victim. She never truly apologized. She never admitted she was wrong. She only tried to make me feel guilty, to pull me back in with pity, with the same manipulative words I had heard all my life. But this time, I am no longer the 14-year-old girl trembling in fear at threats. I am no longer the young woman desperately seeking validation from my family. I have grown up, and I no longer let them control me. Right now, I am sitting in my cozy little home beside my husband, contemplating how to navigate the complex family turmoil that followed my wedding. As I gaze out the window, I wonder if I can find any peace among the shattered pieces of the past. At this moment, many of my relatives, including those who were not even invited to the wedding, have reached out, offering sincere apologies for what I had to endure. They said that, living far away and not being in frequent contact, they had no idea about the chaos within my family. While I know they cannot be fully held accountable for what happened, their apologies bring a small sense of comfort to my heart. However, not everyone has shown sympathy. My maternal aunts and my mother's friends have criticized me without hesitation. They believe I was wrong for not explicitly informing my mother that my wedding was happening, causing her to fall into unbearable sorrow. According to them, it was my responsibility to ensure that my mother was not hurt, but to me, this felt like an unfair demand in a family that had long been full of injustices. Personally, while I have my doubts, I believe my mother is only pretending to be heartbroken to protect her image in society, to save face in front of others. Yet, deep down, I still wonder if that is truly the case. Previously, recent messages from my parents revealed their deep sorrow and regret for missing my wedding, the day I had always dreamed of sharing my happiness with my family. Now, my family seems to be divided into 3 distinct factions. Most of my relatives stand by me, sharing in the pain and memories I have endured for so many years. Meanwhile, my maternal aunts criticize me, believing that I have hurt my mother, whom they think deserves to be protected and loved more. Lastly, my grandparents firmly insist that I should forgive my mother, adamantly claiming that she is making amends for her past mistakes. On the other hand, my closest friends, those who have stood by me through all my ups and downs, have advised me not to let my family's criticism and pressure weigh me down. In that moment, as I sat beside my husband, I felt overwhelmed and exhausted by the family conflict. I asked myself, is there a way to mend everything without losing myself? Should I forgive and return to the way things were, or should I stand firm and protect myself from the pain of the past? Though the answer is not yet clear, one thing I know for sure is this: my happiness does not depend on the approval or forgiveness of others. It belongs to me, to my husband, and to the friends who have always been sincerely by my side. Through all the pain and conflicts you have endured, the greatest lesson is to always cherish and protect your own self-worth. You deserve to be loved, respected, and to live a happy life, without needing the approval or acceptance of those who have hurt you. Do not let the past define who you are. Instead, see it as a lesson to grow and become stronger. Set clear boundaries with those who do not appreciate you, and do not hesitate to choose a new life surrounded by those who truly care for and love you, like your husband and your closest friends. Finally, remember that forgiveness does not necessarily mean reconnecting with toxic relationships. It simply means freeing yourself from the burden of resentment so that you can move forward into a brighter and more liberated future.